65% of American households cannot afford the median-priced new home. That is roughly 88 million families, priced out, locked out, written off. Not just in San Francisco, not just in Manhattan, in every state in the country, including Mississippi. These are not people who made bad choices. These are working parents in their 40s, nurses, loan officers, electricians, a teacher who was taught in the same district for 18 years, a mechanic whose father owned the shop before him. People who did everything they were told to do, got the job, kept the credit clean, showed up on time for 2 decades, and still cannot buy the kind of house their parents bought at the same age. You know the feeling before you know the number. You drive past the street you grew up on. There is a for sale sign in the yard of the house next door to the one where you learned to ride a bike. You slow down. You look at the price. And you understand in the pit of your stomach that your own income would not clear it. Not close. Not with a cosigner. Not with everything you have saved. That feeling is the story. The number behind it is worse than most Americans realize. The headline figure comes from a national homebuilders affordability analysis released earlier this year. 65% of U.S. households, about 88 million families, cannot afford the median-priced new home at current mortgage rates. It uses the standard underwriting rule that housing should take no more than 28% of gross income. Above that line, the math breaks. Below it, you can carry the payment. 2 out of every 3 American households now sit above the line. Here is what makes it land. That figure is not driven by San Jose, where only a small share of local households can afford the local median. It is not driven by New York or Seattle, where you need a 6-figure income well into the 200s just to buy the middle house on the block. It is a national average, and the national average includes Mississippi. Consider Mississippi for a moment. Among the cheapest states in the Union by most measures, the median new home price there sits around $267,000, well under the national figure. And yet, roughly 61% of Mississippi households still cannot afford it. 61%. In Mississippi. That single fact should end the argument that this is a coastal problem, or a big city problem, or a young professional in Brooklyn problem. It is a national condition. Now look at the other end of the map. In New Hampshire, the median new home runs close to $678,000. More than 80% of households there are priced out, among the worst shares in the country. Between those 2 states, one poor, one wealthy, one deep South, one deep New England, you find every other American market. Across most states, plus the District of Columbia, more than 2 out of every 3 households cannot afford the median new home. The math is that unforgiving. By the builder's own analysts, a single $1,000 bump in the median new home price knocks well over 100,000 additional families out of the market. $1,000. A trim upgrade, a permit fee, a rate tick. Another small city's worth of American families falls off the ladder. A longtime resident of the Mountain West has watched all of this from the inside. 20 years in the same state, a career built there. Median home prices in Montana and Idaho surged more than 50% between 2020 and 2025. Local wages did not move, not meaningfully. The observation is simple and it is brutal. This is not a gap that frugality closes. It is not a matter of cutting the streaming services and packing lunch. When prices double and paychecks stay flat, discipline stops working. That is what makes this different from the housing stories you have heard before. There was a time when a young family could drive 2 hours out of the expensive city and land somewhere they could afford. That escape valve has closed. In a small Georgia town outside Atlanta, the median home just crossed $500,000, up more than a quarter in a single year. In a rural Arkansas town, the median is now around $450,000. These are not resort towns. They are places that had gas stations and one grocery store. And underneath all of it sits a second number the country has barely absorbed. American homeowners as a class now hold more than $30 trillion in home equity by the Federal Reserve's own tally, up many trillions since 2019 alone. The average homeowner sits on close to $300,000 in equity they did nothing to earn. On the other side of that line, renter households have less money left at the end of the month than at any point on record. Two Americas, same country, same week, both true. Which raises the question the rest of this report has to answer. If nearly 2/3 of the country cannot afford the median new home, if even Mississippi is priced out, then what does the math actually look like at the kitchen table where the bills get sorted? In early 2020, the monthly payment on a median-priced American home was roughly $1,700. By late 2025, that same payment ran around $3,100, close to a doubling in 5 years. That is not inflation. That is a different country. These are not luxury homes, not beach houses or ski chalets or urban penthouses. These are the ordinary 3-bedroom, 2-bath, quarter-acre houses that a generation ago a single-earner household could carry. The same house, the same square footage, the same shingles on the same roof. What changed is the paperwork the buyer signs at closing. Look at the number the way a buyer looks at it. $3,100 a month. Every month. For 30 years. Just the mortgage. Not the roof that will need replacing. Not the taxes. Not the insurance premium that has doubled in some states. Not the furnace. Not the water heater. Just the note the bank holds. To carry that payment under the standard rule that housing should eat no more than 1/3 of your income, you now need to earn over $120,000 a year. In 2020, the same threshold sat in the mid-60s. The income required to buy the median American house nearly doubled in half a decade. Your paycheck did not. Here is where the arithmetic turns brutal. Only about 1 in 6 renter households in the country earns that $120,000 minimum. The other 4 out of 5 renters in America are not merely stretched, not merely waiting for the right listing. They are structurally locked out of buying the middle of the market. Not this year, not next year. Under the current math, not ever, unless something breaks. And something is breaking. The listings themselves. In 2019, if you were a household earning $75,000, a figure still above the American median at the time, roughly half of every home listed for sale in the country was priced within your reach. Half the inventory. Something to actually walk through on a Saturday afternoon. By early 2026, that share had collapsed to around 1 listing in 4. A steep implosion of the entry-level market in 7 years. You can feel that number without ever seeing a spreadsheet. It is the open house you drove to and left in 10 minutes because the price on the flyer had another digit than you were told. It is the search filter on your phone that used to return hundreds of results and now returns dozens. It is the loan officer who stops calling back. In Charlotte, North Carolina, a young loan officer who spends her days originating mortgages for other people said it out loud. If someone had told her a year or two ago that she would be spending $500,000 on her first house, she would have thought they were out of their minds. Today, $500,000 sounds like a good price. Consider what that sentence contains. A young professional, inside the industry, watching her own price ceiling normalize upward by $250,000 in 24 months, and feeling grateful for the number that would have shocked her mother. If this reporting is landing for you, if the math on your own kitchen table looks something like the math we are describing, a quiet like helps this reach other Americans trying to make sense of what just happened to the housing market they grew up assuming they could enter. Here is the piece that will not sit still. Rents, on paper, are nominally ticking down in parts of the country for the first time in years. Vacancy rates are climbing. The rental market, by the numbers a landlord looks at, is loosening. Yet the count of cost-burdened renter households, Americans paying more than 30% of what they earn just to keep the lights on and the door locked, just hit an all-time record. Both things are true at once. The rent went down, the burden went up. How that is possible is the question the back half of this report has to answer. But before that answer, another one. Because none of what you just heard, the near doubling of the payment, the vanished starter listings, the six-figure income floor to buy a normal house, none of it happened by accident. And none of it happened this decade. In the late 1970s, researchers at a major university sat with a number that scared them. Around $78,000. That was what the median new home might cost by the 1980s if the trend line held. They meant it as an alarm, a warning to a country that still believed in its bones that a working paycheck bought a working family a house. The median new home price in 2025 sits above $400,000. Nobody listened. Not for a decade. Not for two. Not for the 50 years between that warning and the kitchen table you are sitting at right now. In 1970, nearly half of American families could afford a median-priced home. By the mid-1970s, only about a quarter could. The trap had already sprung. Researchers saw it, policymakers filed the report, and the country kept building the same suburbs, tightening the same zoning codes, and telling the same young workers that if they just worked hard enough, the door would open for them, too. Consider what actually broke. Around 1973, the post-war wage machine stopped turning. Union density began its long slide. Residential construction slowed. And in city after city, a new generation of homeowners started showing up at planning meetings to ask that no more apartments be built near them. In the late 1970s, San Francisco set strict density limits across much of the city, effectively banning new multifamily construction across large residential zones. Environmental laws written for dams and freeways were quietly turned against fourplexes. Then, in the middle of the decade, a federal moratorium on new public housing choked off the affordable pipeline. A single administrative signature, hundreds of thousands of units that never got built. 50 years of that, compounding, quietly. In every zip code where a public hearing could kill a duplex. The country also stopped building for its own workforce. Housing starts today run below the annual pace of the 1970s, in a country with tens of millions more people. Nonpartisan analysts who model these things put the current national shortage of homes somewhere between 4 and 7 million units. That is not a rounding error. That is a decade of construction the country never did. Then came the shock that finished the job. Between 2020 and 2022, home prices surged more than 50% in a compressed, almost hallucinatory run-up, funded by a Federal Reserve that stepped in to buy up mortgage-backed bonds at historic lows. Money was free. Rates were around 3%, and the prices ran. When the free money ended in early 2022, rates roughly doubled inside 12 months. But the prices did not come back down. They locked in place at the new altitude, with everyone who had bought before the spike sitting on a mortgage they could never replace. That is the piece that traps the market today. Millions of homeowners hold 3% loans. Trading up means signing a 6 or 7% loan on a house that costs far more than theirs did 5 years ago. So they do not move. They rent the old house out and become landlords they never wanted to be. The for sale sign never goes in the yard. The listing never appears. A whole generation waiting to buy finds the inventory has simply vanished from underneath them. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, the newest wave arrived on a jet of AI capital. Businesses leased millions of square feet of city office space in a burst, a record-setting stretch by one local commercial tally. One AI firm alone took over 1 million square feet. A luxury leasing agent describes hundreds of calls a day now from venture capitalists and startup founders in their 20s and 30s with, in her words, a lot of money. One-bedroom rents surged sharply in a single year, among the fastest jumps in any major American city. And under all of it, the labor market that was supposed to lift wages to meet the prices simply stalled. By the Federal Jobs Agency's count, the country added just over 100,000 jobs in 2025, among the smallest annual gains in any non-recession year in more than 2 decades. What is the moment your own town started to feel out of reach? The year, the season, the sale you noticed on your street? Drop it in the comments. The map of when this hit where you live matters. The observation from the Mountain West resident lands here, too. When median home prices jump more than half in 5 years and local wages do not move, the buyer walking in with a bank account built in Los Angeles or Seattle is not competing on savings discipline. They are competing on a purchasing power differential no working local can close. The house you grew up in is not being taken by a villain. It is being taken by numbers you were never given the chance to run. So the warning was real. The warning was ignored. And the country that ignored it is the one you live in now. Which raises a question every priced-out American eventually asks. Where exactly is there left to go? The advice was simple. Go inland. Go rural. Go somewhere small. For a decade, that was the escape hatch every priced-out American was pointed toward. That hatch is welded shut. Rural and small-town home prices have surged as fast as the coasts they were supposed to be an escape from. In the 5 years after 2020, mortgage application activity in rural and non-metro counties jumped by roughly 80% by OneTracker's count. Not a bump, not a trickle, a flood. Buyers arriving with city-sized bank accounts, bidding on the same houses longtime residents raised their kids in. You know what happens next. The teacher, whose family has been in the same county for 4 generations, gets outbid by a stranger from a market 1,000 miles away. The mechanic, who was going to buy his uncle's place, watches it go to a cash offer sight unseen. The rules did not just change on the coasts. They changed on the 2-lane road, too. Montana and Idaho are the clearest case. Local wages held flat, while the price of the average house climbed past 6 times what a local household earns. In Montana, that ratio hit above 6. In Idaho, close behind. Numbers that used to belong to San Francisco and Boston now describe towns where the nearest stoplight is 30 miles away. These are not tourists in Bozeman ski chalets. These are lifelong residents of small mountain towns, families with 3 generations in the same county, being outbid on their own zip code by remote workers whose employers pay California salaries and never ask where they log in from. Now drive east. Houston, Georgia. A small town outside Atlanta, the kind of place people used to move to when Atlanta priced them out. In 1 year, home prices there jumped by roughly a quarter. The median house now lists in the mid-500s. 2 years earlier, it was under 400,000. And the strange twist? The average listing sits on the market for many months. Prices climbing, houses not moving, sellers refusing to come down, buyers refusing to reach up. A stalemate at a price ordinary Georgians cannot pay. The pattern repeats in every direction. Tontitown, Arkansas, a town of a few thousand, median home now around $450,000. Wildwood, Florida, population roughly doubled in a few years. Among the fastest growing towns in America are the ones locking their own workforce out. And this is where the data gets brutal. Across roughly 160 metro areas the country's housing analysts track, home values grew faster than young adult incomes in well over 140 of them. Not most, not the coastal ones, nearly all. 5 years ago, about 4 in 10 American metros counted as unaffordable for households under 40. Today, more than 6 in 10 do. In 5 years, the map of where a young American can afford to start a life shrank by a third. The share of buyers under 35 just hit among its lowest points on record. The first-time buyer as a category, the young family that used to define the American housing story, is disappearing from the closing tables. The median age of a first-time buyer in this country is now pushing 40. A generation ago, it was under 30. If even Mississippi, among the cheapest states in the country by most measures, still prices out around 60% of its households, then the cheap America the advice always pointed to does not exist as a place. It exists as a memory. The warning from the 1970s that only the most affluent Americans would own homes if the trend held was not a prediction that failed. It was a prediction the country had 50 years to act on and did not. The map they drew is the map you are standing on. So the coastal ladder is gone. The interior ladder is gone. What is left is the door most Americans are already walking through. The rental market. And what happened there in the last 12 months breaks the last assumption you have left. Rents are nominally falling for the first time in years. Cost burdens just hit an all-time record. Both of those sentences are true at the same time in the same country. That contradiction is the door into the rental market. Walk through it, and the last comforting story about American housing falls apart. Roughly 22.5 million renter households were cost-burdened in 2024. About half of every renter in America, nearly 1 in 2. That number is the highest ever measured by the housing researchers who track it, up more than 2 million from 2019, up close to 8 million since 2001. Not a bad year, not a bad decade. A quarter-century climb that finally broke the ceiling. Cut it deeper. More than 12 million of those households are severely cost-burdened. More than half of every paycheck goes to rent and utilities before a single grocery bag hits the kitchen counter. Roughly a quarter of American renters. 1 in 4. So how can rents be softening while the pain gets worse? The answer sits in the wage line running underneath the rent line. Since the early 2000s, rents rose roughly 30% in real terms. Renter wages rose under 10. A small dip in the asking price on a new lease does not touch a gap that wide. The tide came in for more than 20 years. It just stopped rising for a moment. The water is still up to the ceiling, and the floor of the market is gone. Over the last decade, millions of rental units that once rented for under $1,000 a month have vanished. By one estimate, on the order of 7 million doors. Not misplaced, gone. Torn down, converted, renovated, repriced. Nearly every new rental building put up in the last 10 years has been at the higher end. The bottom of the market has been quietly deleted, while the top of the market kept adding floors. A working parent who used to pay $850 a month for a two-bedroom now searches the same neighborhood and finds nothing under $1,400. Same building, same paint, new rent. Multiply that by millions of doors across the country, and you have the shape of the vanishing floor. Now, the number that should stop the room. For lower-income renters, residual income, what is left after rent and utilities, has fallen by more than half since 2001. By one measure, it sits at a record low of around $210 a month. $210 for food, for gas, for the electric bill, for the copay at urgent care, for the school shoes, for the tire that just went flat in the driveway. Everything a household needs to survive out of $210 after the landlord is paid. On the other side of that ledger, a different America. Homeowners now sit on more than $30 trillion in collective home equity. The average homeowner is holding close to $300,000 in equity they did not have 6 years ago. Many trillions of dollars of new wealth accumulated by the people who already owned the door, while the people renting the door watched their monthly cushion collapse toward $200. That is the split. The overwhelming majority of American renters do not earn the $120,000 now required to buy the median home. Structurally locked out. Not by choice, by math. The consequences are showing up on the sidewalk. Homelessness in this country hit among its highest recorded levels in 2024, up sharply in a single year, with family homelessness climbing faster than any other category. These are not the stereotypes. Roughly 4 in every 10 homeless adults are working. They just cannot rent a door on what the door now costs. So the question the rental crisis leaves on the table is a simple one. If prices are supposed to correct, when? By how much? And will it be enough? Prices are supposed to fall. That is the promise sitting under every housing headline right now, that some correction is coming, that patience will be rewarded, that if you just wait, the door will open again. Here is what the correction actually looks like. 1%. That is what one leading housing research group projects for single-family prices in 2026, 2% in 2027, 2% in 2028. Add those together, and you get a 5% trim on a market that ran up more than 50% in 2 pandemic years. A house that peaked around $425,000 slips to about $404,000. The income you need to buy it barely moves. The mortgage rate barely moves. The line at the closing table barely moves. That is the correction. That is the relief. Now sit with what that means for a family at the middle of the American income distribution. Household income of a little over $100,000, solidly above the national median. Around a third of every dollar they earn before taxes goes to the mortgage payment on a median-priced home. Not the utilities, not the property taxes, not the insurance premium that has doubled in some states. Just the mortgage. For a family earning half the median, that number climbs to nearly 2/3, 2 out of every $3. You do not budget your way out of that. You do not coupon your way out of that. You do not pick up a second shift and close that gap. And the rental side is about to get worse before it gets better. What is left of the sub-$1,000 market is largely protected by a single federal program, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. And those protections are written to expire, property by property, building by building. Over the next 10 years, hundreds of thousands of those units are set to roll off their affordability requirements. The landlord will do the math. Market rate wins, the letter goes out, the rent goes up. The family that has been paying $840 a month for 11 years starts looking for somewhere they cannot find. Meanwhile, the one federal lifeline that could catch them, the Housing Choice Voucher, reaches roughly 1 in 4 eligible households. 3 out of 4 qualifying families get nothing. Not because they failed the test, because the program is not funded to serve them. The managing director of one of the country's leading housing research centers put it plainly at a panel earlier this year. Only the federal government has the scale and the staying power to close this gap. Not cities, not states, not the market on its own. The last time this country attempted a housing intervention at that scale, the returning generation from a world war came home to the GI Bill. Nothing that big has been tried since. If this reporting has been useful, if it clarified something the headlines have been circling around, subscribing keeps more of it coming. And passing it to one person in your life who is trying to make the math work on a house right now is the quiet way to help. Someone in their 30s looking at listings and doing the arithmetic. Someone older watching their kids move back home. That is who this is for. The house on the corner where you grew up is worth several times what your parents paid for it, in real dollars. The paycheck that bought it then does not buy it now. That gap is not a market cycle. It is a 50-year drift, compounding quietly, transferring the deed of American life from the people who arrived early to the people who arrived late. 3 numbers decide what happens next, and they are worth watching in the months ahead. Whether the affordable units protected by the expiring federal tax credit get renewed or roll to market rate. Whether the Housing Choice Voucher program is funded to reach more than 1 in 4 eligible households. And whether the income required to buy the median American home comes down from $120,000 or keeps climbing. Those 3 lines decide whether the town you grew up in stays a place people like you can afford to live, or becomes a place you can only afford to drive through.